now you can start to see, oh, wow, this is why flow shows up whenever the impossible becomes possible. This is what's at the center of that work. I get that now. You can't, it's you can use focus. There is you.
When I came across the term flow, and I'm very new, I have to admit, I thought it's focus. And it doesn't look like it is. So I would, if you tell us, our audience, what is the difference between focus and concentration and flow?
Oh, that's a great point. So we don't actually know. And what I mean by that is there is a spectrum of attention, right? It starts kind of at one end on like apathy and boredom and like lack of focus. I can't focus on anything, right? And it goes all the way through kind of concentration, and I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, into engagement, absorption, and then flow. And what exactly is the dividing line, and where does one thing lead into the next, is an ongoing debate. But what is different about this is flow is an altered state of consciousness. It is not. So when you think of focus and attention, you're thinking that the prefrontal cortex, the executive attention network, is very active. It's doing its job, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case in flow. So let's talk about what we mean by flow, first of all. I gave you a scientific definition, but it doesn't get us very far. More specifically, flow refers to any of those moments of rapt attention, total absorption, when you get so focused on the task at hand that everything else will start to disappear. Action and awareness are going to merge. Sense of self, that could be the voice in your head getting very, very quiet, is going to start to diminish. Bodily awareness is going to go away. Sometimes at the extreme edge of that, you start to, our boundaries start to go away. We start to feel one with everything, and those kinds of more mystical experiences. We understand the biology underneath them, but self vanishes and other things can happen. Is the point there. Time dilates, passes strangely. Usually, more common experience, get so interested in what you're doing, so sucked in that like 5 hours go by and you look up and you're like, what, it felt like 5 minutes, right? And throughout all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. And this is the major difference between focus and flow. So focus, we're paying more attention to the thing at hand. What happens in flow? I'll give you different numbers done by different researchers. We won't spend too much time here unless you want to come back, but we see motivation, grit, and productivity soar, skyrocket. McKinsey, the business consultancy, did a study over 10 years talking to top executives. How much more productive are you in flow? Self-reported, so take it with a grain of salt, but 10 years is a long time, and they talked to a lot of people. Average was 500% more productive. It's a massive boost. And this is in line with other research. The Department of Defense found that soldiers in flow learn 240 to 500% faster than normal. Research we did at the Flow Research Collective that was sort of done at USC, University of Sydney, a couple other places, Harvard, found that creativity will spike 400 to 700%. And you can look under those, all aspects of creativity, problem identification, problem solving, all, et cetera, et cetera. Happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, meaning, purpose, go through the roof. In fact, when psychologists now define happiness, meaning, purpose, all those things, all of the upper tiers of that, they're all defined by how much flow you have in the experience. So very foundational there. We also see really like foundational 21st century business skills, empathy, cooperation, collaboration, communication, perspective taking. All these things are also amplified in flow. So now you can start to see, oh, wow, this is why flow shows up whenever the impossible becomes possible. This is what's at the center of that work. I get that now. You can't, you can use focus. So in athletics, they have a joke, which is you can win the world championship without flow, but you're going to hate the experience. You're never going to want to do it again. It's so difficult, so unpleasant. You can do it, and it happens. Usually, like why do they have 7-game series? Because you can't win one of those without flow. That's really, when you're looking at a 7-game series, you're looking at a contest between teams trying to get into more flow or less flow or knock the other people out of flow. That's what's going on in a 7-game series. That's one of the things that makes them interesting, I think. Anyways, long answer, but hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand. So is it fair to say that focus is much of a...
No, let me give it to you neurobiologically. So, because it's easier mechanistically. When you are focusing, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is right back here, is actively engaged. We are also producing brain waves that are in the beta frequency. Beta is alert, awake, focused, and attentive. In flow, the prefrontal cortex deactivates. It's called transient hypofrontality. That's why our sense of self disappears in flow. That's why time passes so strangely. Time is calculated all over the prefrontal cortex. Parts of it wink out. We lose the ability to separate past from present and future. We're plunged into that elongated now. Our sense of self, again, another network effect produced partially in the prefrontal cortex. The network goes down. We lose our ability to produce our sense of self. Why does it get so quiet upstairs? Because the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that's essentially our inner critic, turns off in flow. In focus, it's hyperactive. All this stuff is hyperactive. In flow, brain waves drop from beta all the way down to the borderline between alpha and theta. Alpha is daydreaming mode. You're not awake and alert and focused. You're going from thought to thought to thought. Theta is, we're there a lot of different times, but we're also there in REM sleep when we're dreaming, right? So these are very different brainwave patterns. Focus is a very, very different thing from flow. Now, focus is also the key to getting into flow. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. The first one is complete concentration. Flow follows focus. It shows up when all our attention is in the right here, right now. So flow states have 22 triggers. That's what they all do. They drive our attention into the right here, right now. They produce and heighten focus. Now, there are lots of different ways to produce and heighten focus. You can use the prefrontal cortex, which is what you do when you're trying to read a book that you're not super interested into, or listening to a lecture or in a meeting, that sort of stuff. You can also produce neurochemicals, dopamine and norepinephrine. These are focus enhancing chemicals. They show up when we're excited, when we're curious, when we're interested. There's other ways of doing it as well. That's what flow leverages, these other kind of more intrinsic systems.
So let's say when somebody is in flow state and you put the EEG or those wires on their head, what would be the state then? Would it be mostly alpha and theta?
Well, so if you're measuring brain waves, yes. I mean, but so you're not asking, that's not a real question in a sense. You have to know, well, where are the brain waves coming from? So for example, when Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's often called the godfather of flow psychology, in the 70s started doing the EEG experiments on flow, he was looking at chess players. What he found is, yes, their brain waves dropped to lower alpha and theta, but there was no activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's where that finding first showed up. So it's a where and a what, and that's still not only a partial picture. When we talk about the neurobiology of flow, we're also talking about networks, right? Because very rarely do things take place in one place in the brain. There's a whole network effect. We're also talking about changes in neural anatomy, neuroelectricity, and neurochemistry. So all four of these things are shifting significantly, which is what makes flow an altered state of consciousness.
Okay, and you mentioned the name of this hormone, norepinephrine. I mean, I can never say that name. Is it same as adrenaline?
No, it's noradrenaline.
Noradrenaline.
So, yeah.
Noradrenaline.
So in Europe, they call it noradrenaline. In America, they call it norepinephrine, because adrenaline in America originally, though we don't use the term anymore, was epinephrine. It's not anymore. It's now we use adrenaline and norepinephrine, and it drives people crazy, and nobody knows what's going on. So your question about norepinephrine.
So it's about that. Yeah. So it's about when we say that we get adrenaline rush, then probably what we mean is that we get the feeling of flow.
No, well, it depends, because there is an adrenaline rush that is adrenaline. When we trigger the fight response, you get adrenaline, testosterone, cortisol, and norepinephrine, possibly a little dopamine, depending on what the response is being used for. But that's an adrenaline response. Flow flushes stress hormones. So most of those chemicals get flushed out of our system, and you get a little bit of norepinephrine, a lot of dopamine, anandamide, possibly some endorphins. If you're with other people, you'll get oxytocin and some serotonin on the back end. There's obviously way more stuff, glutamate and GABA, and all the other neurochemicals that are involved in brain function are involved too. But so it's a shift in hormonal profiles and neurochemical function and whatnot.